Welcome back to another Sister to Sister story time session. We are in the final moments of the apocalypse. D-Day. You can call me the daughter of doom. Yes, I am here to read you your rights. So today we are talking about the West Coast, Los Angeles, the city of lost souls, the seat of Satan, the land of the Moors, or the land of the dead. Um, I'm first going to read the scripture on this area. Um, so, Baal. This is all goes, all roads lead to Baal worship. So, the demons that Solomon set up temples for, we know that Solomon um, they say that Solomon controlled demons with a ring. So he would be considered the Lord of the Rings, right? 110 on the clock, 66%. Okay, so Solomon in the Bible. So Solomon is known for being the king of Israel who built the first temple in Jerusalem. He was also the second after his father David and last king of the unified Israel, which was at the height of its power during his reign. He is known for stories told in the Bible about his said wisdom. So this is Wikipedia on Solomon. Okay, so Solomon, also called Jedediah, was a monarch of ancient Israel and the son and successor of King David, according to the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. He is described as having been the penultimate ruler of an amalgamated Israel and Judah. The hypothesized dates of Solomon's reign are from 970 to 931 BCE. According to the Bible, after his death, his son and successor Rehoboam adopted a harsh policy towards the northern tribes, eventually leading to the splitting of the Israelites between the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. Following the split, the biblical narrative depicts his patrilineal descendants ruling over Judah alone. The Bible says Solomon built the first temple in Jerusalem, dedicating the temple to Yahweh or God. Solomon is portrayed as wealthy, wise, and powerful, and as one of the 48 Jewish prophets. He is also the subject of many later references and legends, most notably in the Testament of Solomon, part of first century biblical apocrypha. The historicity of Solomon is hotly debated. Current consensus allows for a historical Solomon, but regards his reign as king over Israel and Judah in the 10th century BCE as uncertain, and the biblical description of his apparent empire's lavishness as most probably an anachronistic exaggeration. In the New Testament, he is portrayed as a teacher of wisdom excelled by Jesus of Nazareth, and as arrayed in glory, but excelled by the lilies of the field. In the Quran, he is considered to be a major Islamic prophet. In mostly non biblical circles, Solomon also came to be known as a magician and an exorcist with numerous amulets and medallion seals dating from the Hellenistic period invoking his name. The biblical account. The life of Solomon is primarily described in Second Samuel, First Kings, and Second Chronicles. His two names are traditionally taken to mean peaceful and friend of God, both considered predictive of the character of his reign. A 2023 textbook describes three possibilities for the etymology of Solomon's name: compensation or a substitute, the ruler of peace, or based on the deified evening star, Shalom. Okay, and we know that according to Revelations, that the Antichrist is the vicar of Christ or the replacement of Christ, which is the number of the beast. So the conventional dates of Solomon's reign are derived from biblical chronology and are set from about 970 to 931 BCE, regarding the Davidic dynasty to which King Solomon belongs. Its chronology can be checked against datable Babylonian and Assyrian records at a few points, and these correspondences have allowed archaeologists to date its king in a modern framework. According to the most widely used chronology, based on that by the Old Testament professor Edwin R. Thiel, the death of Solomon and the division of his kingdom would have occurred in the fall of 931 BCE. Solomon was born in Jerusalem, the second born child of David and his wife Bathsheba, widow of Uriah the Hittite. The first child, unnamed in that account, a son conceived adulterously during Uriah's lifetime, had died 7 days after birth. It is suggested in scripture that this was a judgment from God. Solomon had three named full brothers born to Bathsheba: Nathan, Shammua, and Shobab. One second. I did do I put a post up not too long ago about Nathanites, which goes back to the name of the Nephilim. Okay, so Nathan, Shammua, Shamu sounds like a whale. Something about Free Willy. Okay, besides six known older half brothers born of as many mothers. The biblical narrative shows that Solomon served as a peace offering between God and David due to David's adulterous relationship with Bathsheba. In an effort to hide this sin, David sent Bathsheba's husband Uriah the Hittite to battle, and specifically to the front line, wherein David ordered the commanding officer Joab to withdraw support for Uriah in order to have him killed in battle by the enemy. After he died, David was finally able to marry Bathsheba. As punishment, the first child, who was conceived during the adulterous relationship, died. Solomon was born after David was forgiven. Was he really forgiven? Okay. It is this reason why his name, which means peace, was chosen. Scripture says that they will say peace when there is no peace. Some historians cited that Nathan the prophet brought up Solomon as his father was busy governing the realm. This could also be attributed to the notion that the prophet held great influence over David because he knew of his adultery, which was considered a grievous offense under the Mosaic law. According to the first book of Kings, when David was old, he could not get warm. So they sought a beautiful young woman throughout all the territory of Israel and found Abishag the Shunammite and brought her to the king. The young woman was very beautiful, and she was of service to the king and attended him, but the king knew her not. While David was in this state, court factions were maneuvering for power. Adonijah, David's heir apparent, acted to have himself declared king, but was outmaneuvered by Bathsheba and the biblical prophet Nathan, who convinced David to proclaim Solomon king according to his earlier promise, not recorded elsewhere in the biblical narrative, despite Solomon's being younger than his brothers. Solomon, as instructed by David, began his reign with an extensive purge, including his father's chief general, Joab, among others, and further consolidated his position by appointing friends throughout the administration, including in religious positions as well as in civic and military posts. It is said that Solomon ascended to the throne when he was only about 15. Solomon greatly expanded his military strength, especially the cavalry and chariot arms. He founded numerous colonies, some of which doubled as trading posts and military outposts. Trade relationships were a focus of his administration. In particular, he continued his father's very profitable relationship with the Phoenician king Hiram I of Tyre. They sent out joint expeditions to the lands of Tarshish and Ophir to engage in the trade of luxury products, importing gold, silver, sandalwood, pearls, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Solomon is considered the most wealthy of the Israelite kings named in the Bible. Write this down right quick. Okay, so Solomon was the biblical king most famous for his wisdom. In First Kings, he sacrificed to God, and God later appeared to him in a dream, asking what Solomon wanted from God. Solomon asked for wisdom in order to better rule and guide his people. Please, God personally answered Solomon's prayer, promising him great wisdom because he did not ask for self serving rewards like long life or the death of his enemies. Perhaps the best known story of his wisdom is the judgment of Solomon. Two women each lay claim to being the mother of the same child. Solomon easily resolved the dispute by commanding the child to be cut in half and shared between the two. One woman promptly renounced her claim, proving that she would rather give the child up than see it killed. Solomon declared the woman who showed compassion to be the true mother entitled to the whole child. Solomon has traditionally been considered the author of several biblical books, including Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. He is traditionally ascribed authorship of the Wisdom of Solomon, which is included in the scriptures of the Eastern Orthodox and Catholic Church, but is considered apocryphal in Protestant traditions. According to the Hebrew Bible, the ancient kingdom of Israel gained its highest splendor and wealth during Solomon's reign of 40 years. In a single year, according to 1 Kings 10 and 14, Solomon collected tribute amounting to 666 talents. 666 talents, or 18,125 kilograms of gold. Solomon is described as surrounding himself with all the luxuries and the grandeur of an Eastern monarch, and his government prospered. He entered into an alliance with Hiram I, king of Tyre, who in many ways greatly assisted him in his numerous undertakings. For some years before his death, David was engaged in collecting materials for building a temple in Jerusalem as a permanent home for Yahweh and the Ark of the Covenant. Solomon is described as undertaking the construction of the temple with the help of an architect also named Hiram, and other materials sent from King Hiram of Tyre. After the completion of the temple, Solomon is described in the biblical narrative as erecting many other buildings of importance in Jerusalem. For 13 years, he was engaged in the building of a royal palace of Ophel, or a hilly promontory in central Jerusalem. This complex included buildings referred to as the house or hall of the forest of Lebanon, the hall or porch of pillars, the hall of the throne or the hall of justice, as well as his own residence and a residence for his wife, Pharaoh's daughter. Solomon's throne is said to have been spectacularly opulent and possessed moving parts, making it one of the earliest mechanical devices in history. Solomon has constructed great waterworks for the city and the Millo or Septuagint Acra for the defense of the city. However, excavations of Jerusalem have discovered no monumental architecture from the era, and no remains of either the temple or Solomon's palace have been found. Solomon is also described as rebuilding cities elsewhere in Israel, creating the port of Ezion Geber and constructing Palmyra in the wilderness as a commercial depot and military outpost. Although the location of the port of Ezion Geber is known, no remains have ever been found. More archaeological success has been achieved with the major cities Solomon is said to have strengthened or rebuilt, for example, Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. These all have substantial ancient remains, including impressive six-chambered gates and ashlar palaces. However, it is no longer the scholarly consensus that these structures date to the time, according to Bible, when Solomon ruled. According to the Bible, during Solomon's reign, Israel enjoyed great commercial prosperity, with extensive traffic being carried on by land with Tyre, Egypt, and Arabia, and by sea with Tarshish, Ophir, and South India. According to the biblical account, Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. The wives were described as foreign princesses, including Pharaoh's daughter and women of Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and of the Hittites. His marriage to Pharaoh's daughter appears to have cemented a political alliance with Egypt, whereas he clung to his other wives and concubines in quote unquote in love. The only wife mentioned by name is Naamah the Ammonite, mother of Solomon's successor, Rehoboam. The biblical narrative notes with disapproval that Solomon permitted his foreign wives to import their national deities, building temples to Ashereth and Milcom. In the branch of literary analysis that examines the Bible, called Higher Criticism, the story of Solomon falling into idolatry by the influence of Pharaoh's daughter and his other foreign wives is customarily seen as the handiwork of the Deuteronomistic historians who are held to have written, compiled, or edited texts to legitimize the reforms of Hezekiah's great grandson, King Josiah, who reigned from about 641 to 609 BCE, over 280 years after Solomon's death, according to Bible scholars. Scholarly consensus in this field holds that Solomon's wives or women were introduced in the Josianic, customarily DTR, edition of Kings as a theological construct to blame the schism between Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel on his misdeeds. In brief, unelaborated, and enigmatic passage, the Hebrew Bible describes how the fame of Solomon's wisdom and wealth reached even the far off Queen of Sheba. The queen is described as visiting with gifts including gold, spices, and precious stones. When Solomon gave her all her desire, whatsoever she asked, she left satisfied. 1 Kings 10 and 13. Whether the passage is simply to provide a brief foreign witness of Solomon's wealth and wisdom, or whether the visit is meant to have more significance is unknown. Nevertheless, the Queen of Sheba has become the subject of numerous stories. Sheba is typically identified as Saba, a nation once spanning the Red Sea on the coast of what are now Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Yemen in Arabia Felix, although other sources place it in the area of what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. In a rabbinical account, Targum Sheni, colloquy of the Queen of Sheba, Solomon was accustomed to ordering animals to dance before him, a power granted by God, and upon summoning the mountain cock or hoopoe, Aramaic name Nagar Tura, the bird told him it had discovered a land in the east rich in gold, silver, and plants, whose capital was called Kitor, and whose ruler was the Queen of Sheba. Solomon then sent the bird to request the queen's visit. An Ethiopian account from the 14th century, Hebra Nagast, maintains that the Queen of Sheba had sexual relations with King Solomon and gave birth beside the Mai Bela stream in the province of Hamassian Eritrea. The Ethiopian tradition has a detailed account of the affair. The child was a son who became Menelik the first, king of Axum, and founded a dynasty that would reign as the Jewish, then Christian Empire of Ethiopia, which lasted 2,900 years until Haile Selassie was overthrown in 1974. Menelik was said to be a practicing Jew who was given a replica of the Ark of the Covenant by King Solomon, and moreover, that the original Ark was switched and went to Axum with him and his mother, and is still there, guarded by a single dedicated priest. The claim of such a lineage and of possession of the Ark was an important source of legitimacy and prestige for the Ethiopian monarchy through the centuries and had important and lasting effects on Ethiopian culture. The Ethiopian government and church denied all requests to view the alleged ark. Some classical era rabbis attacking Solomon's moral character have claimed instead that the child was an ancestor of Nebuchadnezzar II, who destroyed Solomon's temple some 300 years later. Sins and punishment. Jewish scribes say that Solomon's teacher was Shammai ben Gera, and while he lived, he prevented Solomon from marrying foreign wives. The Talmud says at Ber A, for as long as Shammai, the son of Gera, was alive, Solomon did not marry the daughter of Pharaoh. Solomon's execution of Shammai was his first descent into sin. According to 1 Kings 11, verse 4, Solomon's wives turned his heart after other gods, their own national deities, to whom Solomon built temples, thus incurring divine anger and retribution in the form of the division of the kingdom after Solomon's death. 1 Kings 11, verses 9 through 13. 1 Kings 11 describes Solomon's descent into idolatry, particularly his turning after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the god of the Ammonites. In Deuteronomy 17, verses 16 through 17, a king is commanded not to multiply horses or wives, neither greatly multiply to himself gold or silver. Solomon sinned in all three of these areas. In addition to his wives, he collected 666 talents of gold each year. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 14. A huge amount for a small nation like Israel. He gathered multitudes of horses and chariots from as far as Egypt and, as Deuteronomy 17 warns, took Israel back to Egypt in spirit. According to 1 Kings chapter 11 verses 30 through 34 and 1 Kings chapter 11 verses 9 through 13, it was because of these sins that the Lord punished Solomon by removing most of the tribes of Israel from rule by Solomon's house. And the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Yet for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all of the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem that I have chosen. Near the end of his life, Solomon was beset by several enemies, including Hadad of Edom, Rezin of Zobah, and his own official Jeroboam of the tribe of Ephraim. King Solomon is a central biblical figure who, according to the Hebrew Bible, was the builder of the first temple in Jerusalem and the last ruler of the United Kingdom of Israel. After a reign of 40 years, 1 Kings 11 and 42, he died of natural causes at around 55 years of age. Upon Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam succeeded him, but 10 of the tribes of Israel refused him as king, splitting the monarchy into the northern kingdom of Israel under Jeroboam, while Rehoboam continued to reign over the smaller southern kingdom of Judah. Henceforth, the two kingdoms were never again united. Solomon is associated with the peak golden age of the independent kingdom of Israel and is a legendary source of judicial and religious wisdom. According to Jewish tradition, King Solomon wrote three books of the Bible: Mishlei, Book of Proverbs, a collection of fables and wisdom of life; Kohelet or Ecclesiastes, a book of contemplation and self-reflection; Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, a collection of erotic verse. The verse has been interpreted both literally, describing a romantic and sexual relationship between a man and a woman, and metaphorically describing a relationship between God and his people. The Hebrew word appears in the title of two hymns, 72 and 127 in the Psalms. This Hebrew word means to Solomon, but it can also be translated as by Solomon, thus suggesting to some that Solomon wrote the two Psalms. Rabbinical tradition attributes the Book of Wisdom, including within the Septuagint, to Solomon, although this book was probably written in the 2nd century BCE. In this work, Solomon is portrayed as an astronomer. Other books of wisdom, poetry, such as the Odes of Solomon and the Psalms of Solomon, also bear his name. The Jewish historian Eupolemus, who wrote about 157 BCE, included copies of apocryphal letters exchanged between Solomon and the kings of Egypt and Tyre. The Gnostic Apocalypse of Adam, which may date to the 1st or 2nd century, refers to a legend in which Solomon sends out an army of demons to seek a virgin who had fled from him, perhaps the earliest surviving mention of the later common tale that Solomon controlled demons and made them his slaves. This tradition of Solomon's control over demons appears fully elaborated in the early pseudo-epigraphal work called the Testament of Solomon, with its elaborate and grotesque demonology. As with most biblical personages in the middle era of Israelite society, The historicity of Solomon is hotly debated. Current consensus states that regardless of whether or not a man named Solomon truly reigned as king over the Judean hills in the 10th century BCE, the biblical description of his apparent empire's lavishness is almost surely an anachronistic exaggeration. As for Solomon himself, scholars on both the maximalist and minimalist sides of the spectrum of biblical archaeology generally agree that he probably existed. However, a historically accurate picture of the Davidic king is difficult to construct. According to some archaeologists, Solomon could have only been the monarch of chieftain of Judah, and that the northern kingdom was a separate development. Such positions have been criticized by other archaeologists and scholars who argue that a united monarchy did exist in the 10th century BCE, while agreeing that the biblical account contains exaggerations. Arguments against the biblical description. Historical evidence of King Solomon other than the biblical accounts has been so minimal that some scholars have understood the period of his reign as a dark age. The first century Romano Jewish scholar Josephus in Against Apion, citing Tyrian court records and Menander, gives a specific year during which King Hiram I of Tyre sent materials to Solomon for the construction of the temple. However, no material evidence indisputably of Solomon's reign has been found. Geigel Yadin's excavations at Hazor, Megiddo, Bayat Shan, and Gezer uncovered structures that he and others have argued date from Solomon's reign. But others, such as Israel Finkelstein and Neil Silberman, argue that they should be dated to the Omride period more than a century after Solomon. According to Finkelstein and Silberman, authors of the Bible Unearthed, archaeology's new vision of ancient Israel and the origin of its sacred text, at the time of the kingdoms of David and Solomon, Jerusalem was populated by only a few hundred residents or less, which is insufficient for an empire stretching from the Euphrates to Eilat. According to the Bible Unearthed, archaeological evidence suggests that the kingdom of Israel at the time of Solomon was little more than a small city state, and so it is implausible that Solomon received tribute as large as 666 talents of gold per year. Although both Finkelstein and Silberman accept that David and Solomon were real inhabitants of Judah about the 10th century BCE, they claim that the earliest independent reference to the kingdom of Israel is about 890 BCE, and for Judah about 750 BCE. They suggest that because of religious prejudice, the authors of the Bible suppressed the achievements of the Amrites, whom the Hebrew Bible describes as being polytheists, and instead pushed them back to a supposed golden age of Judaism and monotheists and devotees of Yahweh. Some biblical minimalists like Thomas L. Thompson go further, arguing that Jerusalem became a city and capable of being a state capital only in the mid 7th century. Likewise, Finkelstein and others consider the claimed size of Solomon's temple implausible. Arguments in favor of biblical description. Andre Lemaire states in Ancient Israel, From Abraham to the Roman Destruction of the Temple, that the principal points of the biblical tradition of Solomon are generally trustworthy, although elsewhere he writes that he could find no substantiating archaeological evidence that supports the Queen of Sheba's visit to King Solomon, saying that the earliest records of trans-Arabian caravan voyages from Tamar and Sheba unto the Middle Euphrates, etc., occurred in the mid 8th century BCE, placing a possible visit from the Queen of Sheba to Jerusalem around this time, some 250 years later than the time frame traditionally given for King Solomon's reign. 17 years later, traces of cinnamon were found in Phoenicia in Phoenician clay flasks from there from three small sites in the Israeli coastal plain dating from the 10th century BCE. The authors suggested that trade routes with South Asia existed much earlier than previously thought. Kenneth Kitchen argues that Solomon ruled over a comparatively wealthy mini empire rather than a small city state and considers 666 gold talents a modest amount of money. Kitchen calculates that over 30 years, such a kingdom might have accumulated up to 500 tons of gold, which is small compared to other examples, such as the 1,180 tons of gold that Alexander the Great took from Susa. Similarly, Kitchen and others consider the Temple of Solomon a reasonable and typically sized structure for the region at that time. Dever states that we now have direct Bronze and Iron Age parallels for every feature of the Solomonic temple as described in the Hebrew Bible. Middle way. Some scholars have charted a middle path between minimalist scholars like Finkelstein, Silberman, and Philip Davies, who believes that Solomon is a totally invented character, and maximalist scholars like Lemaire and Kitchen. For instance, the archaeologist Avram Frost has argued that biblical depictions of Solomon date to later periods and do overstate his wealth, buildings, and kingdom, but that Solomon did have an acropolis and ruled over a polity larger than Jerusalem. In particular, his archaeological research in regions near Jerusalem, like Sharon, finds commerce too great not to be supported by a polity, and such regions probably were ruled loosely by Jerusalem. Scholars like Lester Grab also believe that there must have been a ruler in Jerusalem during this period and that he likely built a temple, although the town was quite small. William G. Dever argues that Solomon only reigned over Israel and did build a temple, but that descriptions of his lavishness and the other conquests are strongly exaggerated. The archaeological remains that are considered to date from the time of Solomon are notable for the fact that Canaanite material culture appears to have continued unabated. There is a distinct lack of magnificent empire or cultural development. Indeed, comparing pottery from areas traditionally assigned to Israel with that of the Philistines points to the latter having been significantly more sophisticated. However, there is a lack of physical evidence of its existence despite some archaeological work in the area. This is not unexpected because the area was devastated by the Babylonians, then rebuilt and destroyed several times. In 2014, professor of anthropology Jimmy Harden and his team discovered six official clay boule seals at the site of Gaza called Turbet Sumeli. He states that these bullae are associated with an Iron Age political entity typified by elite activists dated to the 10th century BCE. The bullae appear to be the only known examples that date to this period. In his view, this lends general support to the historical veracity of David and Solomon as recorded in the Hebrew biblical text. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem. A little archaeological excavation has been done around the area known as the Temple Mount in what is thought to be the foundation of Solomon's temple, because attempts to do so are met with protests by Muslim authorities of the Jerusalem Waqf. Okay. Precious metals from Tarshish. The biblical passages that understand Tarshish as a source of King Solomon's great wealth in metals, especially silver, but also gold, tin, and iron, Ezekiel chapter 27, were linked to archaeological evidence from silver hoards found in Phoenicia in 2013. The metals from Tarshish were reportedly obtained by Solomon in partnership with King Hiram of Phoenician Tyre in Isaiah 23, and the fleets of Tarshish and ships that sailed in their service. The silver hoards provide the first recognized material evidence that agrees with the ancient text concerning Solomon's kingdom and his wealth. Possible evidence for the described wealth of Solomon and his kingdom was discovered in ancient silver hoards, which were found in Israel and Phoenicia and recognized for their importance in 2003. The evidence from the hoards shows that the Levant was a center of wealth in precious metals during the reigns of Solomon and Hiram and matches the text that say the trade extended from Asia to the Atlantic Ocean. The Kabul. The distribution of fortified cities between Phoenicia and Galilee in Iron Age IIA 10th to ninth century BCE provides context on Solomon's sale of territory to Hiram, which he derided as Kabul, good for nothing. Kyle H. Keimer argues that they reflected Solomon's apathy to the tribe of Asher, who lived in Phoenicia, or his strategic thinking, where these cities served as defense barriers against foreign invasion. When it came to national defense, Near Eastern states did not rely on walls. Instead, they guarded resources which they prioritized over the people. In addition, it revealed Solomon's political upper hand over Hiram. These events were subsequently preserved in sources which a Deuteronomistic historian relied on when writing 1 Kings 9:11 to 14. From a critical point of view, Solomon's building of a temple for Yahweh should not be considered an act of particular devotion to Yahweh because Solomon is also described as building places of worship for a number of other deities. Some scholars and historians argue that the passages such as his dedication prayer, 1 Kings chapter 8 verses 14 to 66, that describe Solomon's apparent initial devotion to Yahweh were written much later, after Jerusalem had become the religious center of the kingdom, replacing locations such as Shiloh and Bethel. Earlier historians maintain that there is evidence that these passages in Kings are derived from official court records at the time of Solomon and from other writings of that time that were incorporated into the canonical books of Kings. More recent scholars believe that passages such as these in the Book of Kings were not written by the same authors who wrote the rest of the text, instead, probably by the Deuteronomists. Religious views in Judaism. King Solomon sinned by acquiring many foreign wives and horses because he thought he knew the reason for the biblical prohibition and thought it did not apply to him. When King Solomon married Pharaoh's daughter, a sandbank formed, which eventually formed the great nation of Rome, the nation that destroyed Herod's temple. Solomon gradually lost more and more prestige until he became like a commoner. Some say he regained his status, while others say he did not. In the end, however, he is regarded as a righteous king and is especially praised for his diligence in building the temple. King Josiah was also said to have had the Ark of the Covenant, Aaron's rod, the vial of manna, and the anointing oil placed within a hidden chamber which had been built by Solomon. The Seder Olam Rabbah holds that Solomon's reign was not in 1000 BCE, but rather in the ninth century BCE, during which time he built the first temple in 832 BCE. However, the Jewish Encyclopedia of 1906 gives the more common date of 971 to 931 BCE. Christianity. Christianity has traditionally accepted the historical existence of Solomon, though some modern Christian scholars have also questioned at least his authorship of those biblical texts ascribed to him. Such disputes tend to divide Christians into traditionalist and modern camps. Of the two genealogies of Jesus given in the Gospel, Matthew mentions Solomon, but Luke does not. Some commentators see this as an issue that can be reconciled while others disagree. For instance, it has been suggested that Matthew is using Joseph's genealogy and Luke is using Mary's. But Darrell Bach states that this would be unprecedented, especially when no other single woman appears in the line. Other suggestions include the use by one of the royal and the other of the natural line, one using the legal line and the other the physical line, or that Joseph was adopted. Jesus refers to Solomon, using him for comparison in his admonition against worrying about life. This account is recorded in Matthew chapter 6, verse 29, and the parallel passage in Luke chapter 12, verse 27. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, Solomon is commemorated as a saint with the title of righteous prophet and king. His feast day is celebrated on the Sunday of the Holy Forefathers, 2 Sundays before the great feast of the Nativity of the Lord. The staunchly Catholic king Philip II of Spain sought to model himself after King Solomon. Statues of King David and Solomon stand on either side of the entrance to the Basilica of El Escorial, Philip's palace, and Solomon is also depicted in a great fresco at the center of El Escorial's library. Philip identified the warrior King David with his own father, Charles V, and himself sought to emulate the thoughtful and logical character which he perceived in Solomon. Moreover, the structure of the Escorial was inspired by that of Solomon's temple. In Islamic tradition, Solomon is also known as Suleiman ibn Dawood and is considered a prophet and a messenger of God, as well as a divinely appointed monarch. Solomon inherited his position from his father as the prophetic king of the Israelites. Unlike in the Bible, according to Muslim tradition, Solomon never participated in idolatry. The Quran ascribes to Solomon a great level of wisdom, knowledge, and power. He knew the language of the birds, Mantiq al-Tayr. Solomon was also known in Islam to have other supernatural abilities bestowed upon him by God, like controlling the wind, ruling over the jinn, enslaving divs, and hearing the communication of ants. And to Solomon we subjected the wind. Its morning stride was a month's journey, and so was its evening stride. And we caused a stream of molten copper to flow for him. And we subjected some of the jinn to work under him by his Lord's will. And whoever of them deviated from our command, we made them taste the torment of the blaze. Now, jinn, divs or divinations, and ants. Ants brings me to invasion of the body snatchers, possession, jinns possess host. Okay, keep up now. And when they came across a valley of ants, an ant warned, "O ants, go quickly into your homes, so Solomon and his armies do not crush you unknowingly." Now, the god of Shamash, Kamash, Shamash would make sense in this sense, okay? Ants, what did the Israelites say about the giants? They would crush us. They were huge. We're like grasshoppers in their sight. Okay, so the Quran says They instead followed the magic promoted by the devils during the reign of Solomon. Never did Solomon disbelieve, rather, the devils disbelieved. They taught magic to the people along with what had been revealed to the two angels, Harut and Marut, in Babylon. The two angels never taught anyone without saying, "We are only a test for you, so do not abandon your faith." Yet people learned magic that caused a rift even between husband and wife, although their magic could not harm anyone except by Allah's will. They learned what harmed them and did not benefit them, although they already knew that whoever buys into magic would have no share in the hereafter. Miserable indeed was the price for which they sold their souls, if only they knew. The Quran makes a reference to a puppet posing as Solomon in exegetical literature, understood as a genie or demon who escaped captivity and took over his kingdom. Solomon's loss of his throne to the demons has been understood in Islamic spirituality to represent a human losing its soul to demonic passion. Attar of Nishapur writes, "If you bind the div or demon, you will set out for the royal pavilion with Solomon, and you have no command over yourself's kingdom, for in your case, the div or the demon is in the place of Solomon." Solomon's gifts are often used allegorically in popular literature. The demons taking over Solomon's kingdom mirrors the Sufi concept of the mind giving in to evil urges. The ant is depicted as a wise creature, revealing to Solomon the reason behind his gift to control the wind and his name. We also know that Satan is described as the ruler or the prince of the powers of the air. Air equals wind, like the windy city of Chicago. Uh, so during the Islamization of Iran, Solomon became merged with Jamshid, a great king from Persian mythology, about whose similar attributes are ascribed to. Now we have, what is this demon called? Jabulon, Jabulian. Okay. In the Baha'i faith, Solomon is regarded as one of the lesser prophets along with David, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, along with others. Baha'is see Solomon as a prophet who was sent by God to address the issues of his time. Baha'u'llah wrote about Solomon in the Hidden Words. He also mentions Solomon in the Tablet of Wisdom, where he is depicted as a contemporary of Pythagoras. Legends. 1001 Nights. A well known story in the collection, 1001 Nights, describes a genie who had displeased King Solomon and was punished by being locked in a bottle and thrown into the sea. Since the bottle was sealed with Solomon's seal, the genie was helpless to free himself until he was freed many centuries later by a fisherman who discovered the bottle. In other stories from the 1001 Nights, protagonists who had to leave their homeland and travel to the unknown places of the world saw signs which proved that Solomon had already been there. Sometimes protagonists discovered words of Solomon that were intended to help those who were lost and had unluckily reached those forbidden and deserted places. Angels and magic. According to rabbinic literature, on account of his modest request for wisdom only, Solomon was rewarded with riches and an unprecedented glorious realm, which extended over the upper world inhabited by the angels and over the whole of the terrestrial globe with all its inhabitants, including all the beasts, fowl, and reptiles, as well as the demons and spirits. His control over the demons, spirits, and animals augmented his splendor, the demons bringing him precious stones, besides water from distant countries to irrigate his exotic plants. Hmm. The mixing of waters. Okay, so the beasts and fowl of their own accord entered the kitchen of Solomon's palace, so that they might be used as food for him. And extravagant meals for him were prepared daily by each of his 700 wives and 300 concubines, with the thought that perhaps the king would feast that day in her house. Sounds like a brothel. The Seal of Solomon is the legendary signet ring attributed to Solomon in medieval mystical traditions, from which it developed in parallel within Jewish mysticism, Islamic mysticism, and Western occultism. It is the predecessor to the Star of David, the contemporary cultural and religious symbol of the Jewish people. It was often depicted in the shape of either a pentagram or a hexagram. In religious lore, the ring is described as having given Solomon the power to command the supernatural and also the ability to speak with animals. We'll talk about Amalek later. You can check out my last video about Amalek and their animals. So, due to the proverbial wisdom of Solomon, it came to be seen as an amulet or talisman or a symbol to character in medieval magic and Renaissance magic, occultism, and alchemy. Solomon and Asmodeus. One legend concerning Asmodeus, the story of King Solomon and Ashmedai, goes on to state that Solomon one day asked him what could make demons powerful over man. And he asked, uh, Asmodeus asked to be freed and given the ring so that he could demonstrate or demonstrate. Solomon agreed, but Asmodeus threw the ring into the sea and it was swallowed by a fish. Asmodeus then swallowed the king, stood up fully with one wing touching heaven and the other earth, and spat out Solomon to a distance of 400 miles. The rabbis claimed this was a divine punishment for Solomon's having failed to follow three divine commands, and Solomon was forced to wander from city to city until he eventually arrived in the Ammonite city, where he was forced to work in the king's kitchen. Solomon gained a chance to prepare a meal for the Ammonite king, which the king found so impressive that the previous cook was sacked and Solomon put in his place. The king's daughter, Naamah, subsequently fell in love with Solomon, but the family, thinking Solomon a commoner, disapproved. So the king decided to kill them both by sending them into the desert. Solomon and the king's daughter wandered the desert until they reached a coastal city where they bought a fish to eat, which just happened to be the one which had swallowed the magic ring. Solomon was then able to regain his throne and expel Asmodeus. The elements of a ring thrown into the sea and found back in the fish's belly also appeared in Herodotus' account of Philocrates, the tyrant of Samos, 538 to 522 BCE. So I'm going to stop right there and I'm going to go into California. Um, the Native Americans people called Shamosh or Shamash, which is basically the name of said demon. Okay. One second. Okay, so all of this keep in mind, goes back into Egypt. Okay, so before I go into that, I'm going to talk about the Osiris ritual of the golden bow, which is a ritual used by the elites, which is the secret societies, the presidency. They do a raising of Osiris ritual on Inauguration Day, which supposedly gives them, or they are invoking the power of Osiris to rule over said nation. Because when you come into a land, you have to give credence to the gods of that land. So, with America being Egypt, the presidents of America worship the gods of Egypt. So, Obama, the name Obama, Dama meaning high place, okay, like Alabama. The Bible tells you that they worshiped gods on every hill and under every green tree. So this is the Osiris ritual. Now keep in mind what I just read about King Solomon. The popular rites, okay, okay, so the popular rites, a useful clue to the original nature of a god or goddess, is often furnished by the season at which his or her festival is celebrated. Thus, if the festival falls at the new or the full moon, there is a certain presumption that the deity thus honored either is the moon or at least has lunar affinities. If the festival is held at the winter or summer solstice, we naturally surmise that the god is the sun, or at all events, that he stands in some close relation to that luminary. Again, if the festival coincides with the time of sowing or harvest, we are inclined to infer that the divinity is an embodiment of the earth or the corn. So we go back to the children of the corn. Egypt, Joseph, corn, stored up so that they don't have to go through a famine, okay? So these presumptions or inferences taken by themselves are by no means conclusive. But if they happen to be confirmed by other indications, the evidence may be regarded as fairly strong. Unfortunately, in dealing with the Egyptian gods, we are in a great measure precluded from making use of this clue. The reason is not that the dates of the festivals are always unknown, but that they shifted from year to year until, after a long interval, they had revolved through the whole course of the season. This gradual revolution of the festal Egyptian cycle resulted from the employment of a calendar year which neither corresponded exactly to the solar year nor was periodically corrected by intercalation. If the Egyptian farmer of the olden time could get no help except at the rarest intervals from the official or sacerdotal calendar, he must have been compelled to observe for himself those natural signals which marked the time for the various operations of husbandry. In all ages of which we possess any records, the Egyptians have been an agricultural people, dependent for their subsistence on the growth of the corn. The cereals which they cultivated were wheat, barley, and apparently sorghum or Holcus sorghum lineage, the dura of the modern fellahin. Then, as now, the whole country, with the exception of a fringe on the coast of the Mediterranean coast, okay, keep in mind the coast, was almost rainless. It never rains in Southern California, okay? Stay with me now. So, and owed its immense fertility entirely to the annual inundation of the Nile, which, regulated by an elaborate system of dams and canals, which distributed over the fields, renewing the soil year by year with a fresh deposit of mud washed down from the great equatorial lakes and the mountains of Abyssinia. Hence, the rise of the river has always been watched by the inhabitants with the utmost anxiety, for if it either falls short of or exceeds a certain height, dearth and famine are inevitable. And scripture tells you, be anxious for nothing, because as the birds are fed, how much more greater are you, sons of men and daughters. So the water begins to rise early in June, but it is not until the latter half of July that it swells to a mighty tide. Now, we are in latter July at the moment. So by the end of September, the inundation is at its greatest height. The country is now submerged and presents the appearance of a sea of turbid water, from which the towns and villages built on higher ground rise like islands. For about a month, the flood remains nearly stationary, then sinks more and more rapidly, till by December or January the river has returned to its ordinary bed. With the approach of summer, the level of the water continues to fall. In the early days of June, the Nile is reduced to half its ordinary breadth. And Egypt, scorched by the sun, blasted by the wind that has blown from the Sahara for many days, seems a mere continuation of the desert. Now, where is the desert? We have Nevada, Arizona, arid zones. We know that there are wildfires often in California. Okay, so the trees are choked with a thick layer of gray dust. A few meager patches of vegetables watered with difficulty struggle painfully for existence in the immediate neighborhood of the villages. Some appearance of verdure lingers beside the canals and in the hollows from which the moisture has not wholly evaporated. The plain appears to pant in the pitiless sunshine, bare, dusty, ash colored, cracked and seamed as far as the eye can see, with a network of fissures. From the middle of April till the middle of June, the land of Egypt is half alive, waiting for the new Nile. For countless ages, this cycle of natural events has determined the annual labors of the Egyptian husbandman. The first work of the agricultural year is the cutting of the dams, which have hitherto prevented the swollen river flooding the canals and the fields. This is done, and the pent up waters released on their beneficent mission in the first half of August. In November, when the inundation has subsided, wheat, barley, and sorghum are sown. The time of harvest varies, with the district falling about a month later in the north than in the south. In upper or southern Egypt, barley is reaped at the beginning of March, wheat at the beginning of April, and sorghum about the end of the month. Now, with all these different plants, um, you should know what grows natively to the land that you're in. So it would behoove you to look up these items in North America. Okay, so it is natural to suppose that the various events of the agricultural year were celebrated by the Egyptian farmer with some simple religious rites designed to secure the blessing of the gods upon his labors. These rustic ceremonies he would continue to perform year after year at the same season, while the solemn festivals of the priests continued to shift, with the shifting calendar from summer through spring to winter, and so backward through autumn to summer. The rights of the husbandmen were stable because they rested on direct observation of nature. The rites of the priests were unstable because they were based on a false calculation, yet many of the priestly festivals may have been nothing but the old rural festivals disguised in the course of ages by the pomp of sacerdotalism and served by the error of the calendar from their roots in the natural cycle of the seasons. Hence, we have these different calendars, Gregorian, and all the other ones. So these conjectures are confirmed by the little we know both of the popular and of the official Egyptian religion. Thus, we are told that the Egyptians held a festival of Isis at the time when the Nile began to rise. They believed that the goddess was then mourning for the lost Osiris, and that the tears which dropped from her eyes swelled the impetuous tide of the river. Now, if Osiris was in one of his aspects a god of the corn, nothing could be more natural than that he should be mourned at midsummer. For by that time the harvest was past, the fields were bare, the river ran low, life seemed to be suspended, the corn god was dead. At such a moment, people who saw the handiwork of divine beings in all the operations of nature might well trace the swelling of the sacred stream to the tears shed by the goddess at the death of the beneficent corn god, her husband. Now we know scripture says that they had their backs to the temple, facing the east, uh, crying for Tammuz and worshiping the sun. Okay, so, and the sign of the rising waters on earth was accompanied by a sign in heaven. For in the early days of Egyptian history, some 3 or 4 thousand years before the beginning of our era, the splendid star of Sirius, the brightest of all the fixed stars, appeared at dawn in the east just before sunrise, about the time of the summer solstice, when the Nile begins to rise. The Egyptians called it Sothis and regarded it as the star of Isis, just as the Babylonians deemed the planet Venus the star of Astarte. To both peoples, apparently the brilliant luminary in the morning sky seemed the goddess of life and love, come to mourn her departed lover or spouse, and to wake him from the dead. Hence, the rising of Sirius marked the beginning of the sacred Egyptian year and was regularly celebrated by a festival which did not shift with the shifting official year. The cutting of the dams and the admission of the water into the canals and fields is a great event in the Egyptian year. At Cairo, which is in lower Illinois, the operation generally takes place between the 6th and the 16th of August. 616, which is another number for the mark of the beast or the number of the beast, and till lately was attended by ceremonies which deserve to be noticed because they were probably handed down from antiquity. An ancient canal known by the name of the Khalij, sounds like Cali, okay, formerly passed through the native town of Cairo. Near its entrance, the canal was crossed by a dam of earth, very broad at the bottom and diminishing in breadth upwards, which used to be constructed before or soon after the Nile began to rise. In front of the dam, on the side of the river, was reared a truncated cone of earth called the Arusa or ride, on the top of which a little maize or millet was generally grown or sown. So this quote unquote bride was commonly washed down by the rising tide a week or a fortnight. A fortnight would be 2 weeks or 14 days before the cutting of the dam. Tradition runs that the old custom was to deck a young virgin in gay apparel. I don't know if that's happy apparel or men's apparel, and throw her into the river as a sacrifice to obtain a plentiful inundation. So, whether the river, conceived as a male power to his bride, the corn land, which was so soon to be fertilized by his quote unquote water. The ceremony was therefore a charm to ensure the growth of the crops. In modern times, money used to be thrown into the canal on this occasion, and the populace dived into the water after it. This practice also would seem to have been ancient, for Seneca tells us that at a place called the Veins of the Nile, not far from Philae or Philly, the priests used to cast money and offerings of gold into the river at a festival which apparently took place at the rising of the water. The next great operation of the agricultural year in Egypt is the sowing of the seed in November, when the water of the inundation has retreated from the fields. With the Egyptians, as with many peoples of antiquity, the committing of the seed to the earth assumed the character of a solemn and mournful rite. On this subject, I will let Plutarch speak for himself. What he asks, are we to make of the gloomy, joyless, and mournful sacrifices, if it is wrong either to omit the established rites or to confuse and disturb our conceptions of the gods by absurd suspicions? For the Greeks also perform many rites which resemble those of the Egyptians and are observed about the same time. Thus, at the festival of the Thesmorphia in Athens, women sit on the ground and fast, and the Boeotians opened the vaults of the Sorrowful One, naming that festival sorrowful because Demeter is sorrowing for the descent of the maiden. The month is the month of sowing, about the setting of the Pleiades. The Egyptians call it Athir. The Athenians, what is that? Pyan, Pyanapsian. The Boeotians, the month of Demeter, for it was that time of the year when they saw some of the fruits vanishing and failing from the trees, while they sowed others grudgingly and with difficulty, scraping the earth with their hands and huddling it up again on the uncertain chance that what they deposited in the ground would ever ripen and come to maturity. Thus, they did in many respects like those who bury and mourn their dead. The Egyptian harvest, as we have seen, falls not in autumn but in spring, in the months of March, April, and May, which happens to spell out Mam. So, to the husbandman, the time of harvest, at least in a good year, must necessarily be a season of joy. In bringing home his sheaves, he is requited for his long and anxious labors. Yet, if the old Egyptian farmer felt a secret joy at reaping and garnering the grain, it was essential that he should conceal the natural emotion under an air of profound dejection. For was he not severing the body of the corn god with his sickle and trampling it to pieces under the hooves of his cattle on the threshing floor? Accordingly, we are told that it was an ancient custom of the Egyptian corn reapers to beat their breasts and lament over first sheaf cut, while at the same time they called upon Isis. The invocation seems to have taken the form of a melancholy chant, to which the Greeks gave the name of maneros. Similar plaintive strains were chanted by corn reapers in Phoenicia and other parts of Western Asia. Probably all these doleful ditties were lamentations for the corn god killed by the sickles of the reapers. In Egypt, the slain deity was Osiris, and the name Maneros applied to the dirge appears to be derived from certain words meaning come to thy house, which often occur in the lamentations for the dear God. Ceremonies of the same sort have been observed by other peoples, probably for the same purpose. Thus, we are told that among all vegetables, corn, by which is apparently meant maize, holds the first place in the household economy and the ceremonial observance of the Cherokee Indians, who invoke it under the name of the Old Woman, an allusion to admit that it sprang from the blood of an old woman killed by her disobedient sons. After the last working of the crop, a priest and his assistant went into the field and sang songs of invocation to the spirit of the corn. If you've watched The Children of the Corn, they were children that were murdering their parents. Okay, to the, what is it called? Him who lays behind the rose. Okay, stay with me now. So after that, a loud rustling would be heard, which was thought to be caused by the old woman bringing the corn into the field. A clean trail was always kept from the field to the house, so that the corn might be encouraged to stay at home and not go wandering elsewhere. Another curious ceremony, of which even the memory is now almost forgotten, was enacted after the first working of the corn, when the owner or priest stood in succession at each of the four corners of the field and wept and wailed loudly. Even the priests are now unable to give a reason for this performance, which may have been a lament for the bloody death of Salu, the old woman of the corn. In these Cherokee practices, the lamentations and the invocations of the old woman of the corn resemble the ancient Egyptian customs over lamenting over the first corn cut and calling upon Isis herself, probably in one of her aspects, an old woman of the corn. Further, the Cherokee precaution of leaving a clear path from the field to the house resembles the Egyptian invitation to Osiris, come to thy house. So in the East Indies, to this day, people observe elaborate ceremonies for the purpose of bringing back the soul of the rice from the fields to the barn. The Nandi of East Africa perform a ceremony in September when the Eleusine grain is ripening. Every woman who owns a plantation goes out with her daughters into the cornfields and makes a bonfire of the branches and leaves of certain trees. After they After that, they pluck some of the Eleusine, and each of them puts one grain in her necklace, chews another, and rubs it on her forehead, throat, and breast. No joy is shown by the women folk on this occasion, and they sorrowfully cut a basketful of the corn, which they take home with them and place in the loft to dry. The conception of the corn spirit as old and dead at harvest is very clearly embodied in a custom observed by the Arabs of Moab. Stay with me now. So, when the harvesters have nearly finished their task and only a small corner of the field remains to be reaped, the owner takes a handful of wheat tied up in a sheaf. A hole is dug in the form of a grave, and two stones are set upright, one of the head and the other at the foot, just as in ordinary burial. Then the sheaf of wheat is laid at the sheep pronounces these words, the old man is dead. Earth is afterwards thrown in to cover the sheaf with a prayer, may Allah bring us back the wheat of the dead. The official rites, such then were the principal events of the farmer's calendar in ancient Egypt, and such the simple religious rites by which he celebrated them. But we have still to consider the Osirian festivals of the official calendar, so far as these are described by the Greek writers or recorded on the monuments. In examining them, it is necessary to bear in mind that on account of the movable year of the old Egyptian calendar, the true or astronomical dates of the official festivals must have varied from year to year, at least until the adoption of the fixed Alexandrian year in 30 BC. From that time onward, apparently the dates of the festivals were determined by the new calendar, and so ceased to rotate throughout the length of the solar year. At all events, Plutarch, writing about the end of the first century, implies that they were then fixed, not movable. For though he does not mention the Alexandrian calendar, he clearly dates the festivals by it. Moreover, the long festal calendar of Esna, an important document of the imperial age, is obviously based on the fixed Alexandrian year, for it assigns the mark for New Year's Day to the day which corresponds to the 29th of August, which was the first date of the Alexandrian year, and its references to the rising of the Nile, the position of the sun, and the operations of agriculture are all in harmony with this supposition. Thus, we may take it as fairly certain that from 30 BC onwards, the Egyptian festivals were stationary in the solar year. Herodotus tells us that the grave of Osiris was at Sais in Lower Egypt, and that there was a lake there upon which the sufferings of the god were displayed as a mystery by night, children of the night. This commemoration of the divine passion was held once a year. The people mourned and beat their breasts at it to testify their sorrow for the death of the god, and an image of a cow made of glit wood with a golden sun between its horns was carried out of the chamber in which it stood the rest of the year. The cow, no doubt, represented Isis herself, for cows were sacred to her, and she was regularly depicted with the horns of a cow on her head, or even as a woman with the head of a cow. It is probable that the carrying out of her cow shaped image symbolized the goddess searching for the dead body of Osiris, for this was the native Egyptian interpretation of a similar ceremony observed in Plutarch's time about the winter solstice, when the glit cow was carried 7 times round the temple. A great feature of the festival was the nocturnal illumination. People fastened rows of oil lamps to the outside of their houses, and the lamps burned all night long. The custom was not confined to Sais, but was observed throughout the whole of Egypt. This universal illumination of the houses on one night of the year suggests that the festival may have been a commemoration not merely of the dead Osiris, but of the dead in general. In other words, that it may have been a night of all souls, All Souls Day, All Hallows Eve, All Hail Eve. For it is a widespread belief that the souls of the dead revisit their old homes on one night of the year, and on that solemn occasion, people prepare for the reception of the ghosts by laying out food for them to eat and lighting lamps to guide them on their dark road from and to the grave. Herodotus, who briefly describes the festival, omits to mention its date, but we can determine it with some probability from other sources. Thus, Plutarch tells us that Osiris was murdered on the 17th of the month Athir, and that the Egyptians accordingly observed mournful rites for 4 days from the 17th of Athir, or Athir, now in the Alexandrian calendar, which Plutarch used. These 4 days corresponded to the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th of November, and this date answers exactly to the other indications given by Plutarch, who says that at the time of the festival, the Nile was sinking, the north winds dying away, the nights lengthening, and the leaves falling from the trees. During these 4 days, a glit cow swathed in a black cowl was exhibited as an image of Isis. This, no doubt, was the image mentioned by Herodotus in his account of the festival. On the 19th day of the month, the people went down to the sea, the priest carrying a shrine which contained a golden casket. Into this casket they poured fresh water, and thereupon the spectators raised a shout that Osiris was found. After that, they took some vegetable mold, moistened it with water, mixed it with precious spices and incense, and molded the paste into a small moon shaped image, which was then robed and ornamented. Thus, it appears that the purpose of the ceremonies described by Plutarch was to represent dramatically, first, the search for the dead body of Osiris, and second, its joyful discovery, followed by the resurrection of the dead god who came to life again in the new image of vegetable mold and spices. Lactantius tells us how, on these occasions, the priests, with their shaven bodies, beat their breasts and lamented, imitating the sorrowful search of Isis for her lost son Osiris, and how afterwards their sorrow was turned to joy when the jackal headed god Anubis, or rather a mummer in his stead, produced a small boy, the living representative of the god who was lost and was found. Thus, Lactantius regarded Osiris as the son instead of the husband of Osiris, and he makes no mention of the image of vegetable mold. It is probable that the boy who figured in the sacred drama played the part not of Osiris, but of his son, Horus. But as the death and resurrection of the god were celebrated in many cities of Egypt, it is also possible that in some places the part of the god come to life was played by a living actor instead of by an image. Another Christian writer described how the Egyptians with shorn heads annually lamented over a buried idol of Osiris, smiting their breasts, slashing their shoulders, ripping open their old wounds, until after several days of mourning, they professed to find the mangled remains of the god at which they rejoiced. However, the details of the ceremony may have varied in different places. The pretense of finding the god's body, and probably of restoring it to life, was a great event in the festal year of the Egyptians. The shouts of joy which greeted it are described or alluded to by many ancient writers. The funeral rites of Osiris, as they were observed at his great festival in the 16 provinces of Egypt, are described in a long inscription of the Ptolemaic period, which is engraved on the walls of the god's temple at Dendera. The Tintera of the Greeks, a town of Upper Egypt, situated on the western bank of the Nile, about 40 miles north of Thebes. Unfortunately, while the information thus furnished is remarkably full and minute on many points, the arrangement adopted in the inscription is so confused and the expression often so obscure that a clear and consistent account of the ceremonies as a whole can hardly be extracted from it. Moreover, we learn from the document that the ceremonies varied somewhat uh, in the several cities, the ritual of Abydos, for example, differing from that of Busiris, without attempting to trace all the particularities of local usage, I shall briefly indicate what seems to have been the leading features of the festival, so far as these can be ascertained with tolerable certainty. The rites lasted 18 days, from the 12th to the 30th of the month, Koyak, and set forth the nature of Osiris in his triple aspects as dead, dismembered, and finally reconstituted by the union of his scattered limbs. In the first of these aspects, he was called Shint Ament, Kinti Amenti. In the second, Osiris Sep, and in the third, Sokari or Seker. Let's find this. Sokari. That is another name for a Native American tribe. See. One second. Sokari. Too many notes. I gotta put the pieces together for you now. Okay, the Arakara or the Arakari or Ree of North Dakota. And if you follow along with the tribes of North America and see how they were cast out of certain locations and had to move to different locations, such as the Indian reservations. Okay, now the Sokari or Seker, small images of the god were molded of sand or vegetable earth and corn, to which incense was sometimes added. His face was painted yellow and his cheekbones green. These images were cast in a mold of pure gold, which represented the god in the form of a mummy, with the white crown of Egypt on his head. The festival opened on the 12th day of Koyak with a ceremony of plowing and sowing. Two black cows were yoked to the plow, which was made of tamarisk wood, while the share was of black copper. A boy scattered the seed. On end of the field was sown with barley, the other with spelt, and the middle with flax. During the operation, the chief celebrant recited the ritual chapter of the sowing of the fields. At Bucyrus on the 20th of Koyak, sand and barley were put in the god's garden, which appeared to have been a sort of large flower pot. This was done in the presence of the cow goddess Shinti, sounds like Fenty, Rihanna's uh, makeup line or whatever, represented seemingly by the image of a cow made of good sycamore wood with a headless human image in its inside. Then fresh inundation water was poured out of a golden vase over both the goddess and the garden, and the barley was allowed to grow as the emblem of the resurrection of the god after his burial in the earth, for the growth of the garden is the growth of the divine substance. On the 22nd of Koyak, at the 8th hour, the images of Osiris, attended by 34 images of deities, performed a mysterious voyage in 34 tiny boats made of papyrus, which were illuminated by 365 lights. Now, 3-4, if you know the numbers, 304 is a number associated with the Hoe. So, and then 22 is a number associated with said god of the dead. What's his name of Haiti? The guy that said he would rule Haiti forever. He did everything that he did on the 22nd of the month. Okay? Now, the effigy Okay, on the 24th of Koyak, after sunset, the effigy of Osiris in a coffin of mulberry wood, and mulberry trees grow all throughout the United States, was laid in the grave, and at the ninth hour of the night, the effigy which had been made and deposited the year before was removed and placed upon boughs of sycamore. Lastly, sycamore is also a tree that Pocahontas sings about. What'd you say? How high the sycamore grows if you cut it down, then you'll never know. Okay. So, lastly, on the 30th day of Koyak, they repaired to the Holy Sepulchre, a subterranean chamber over which appears to have grown a clump of Persea trees or Persea trees, entering the vault by the western door. According to um, according to something I read somewhere, the west is often associated with death, as I put down there in the description or whatever, and the east is associated with the gate of the gods. So, like with waste, when you flush your toilet, it's supposed to go from east to west, so out into where the water flows outward. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Um, Entering the vault by the western door, they laid the coffined effigy of the dead god reverently on a bed of sand in the chamber. So they left him to his rest and departed from the sepulchre by the eastern door. Okay. Thus ended the ceremonies in the month of Koyak. In the foregoing accounts of the festival, drawn from the great inscription of Dendera, the burial of Osiris figures prominently while his resurrection is implied rather than expressed. This defect of the document, however, is amply compensated by a remarkable series of bas reliefs which accompany and illustrate the inscription. These exhibit in a series of scenes the dead god lying swathed as a mummy on his bier, then gradually raising himself up higher and higher until at last he has entirely quitted the bier and is seen erect between the guardian wings of the faithful Isis, who stand behind him, while a male figure holds up before his eyes the crux ansata, the Egyptian symbol of life. The resurrection of the god could hardly be portrayed more graphically. Even more instructive, however, is another representation of the same event in a chamber dedicated to Osiris in the great temple of Isis at Philae or Philly. Here we see the dead body of Osiris with stalks of corn springing from it, while a priest waters the stalks from a pitcher which he holds in his hand. The accompanying inscription sets forth that this is the form of him whom one may not name, he who must not be named. That is what they call the what is it? The thing from Harry Potter, the antagonist that antagonizes Harry Potter and tried to kill him, but his mother's love saved him. So, Osiris of the Mysteries, who springs from the returning waters. Also, know that the Jewish people say that you cannot say the ineffable name of God. Okay? So, they create different names and they change the names up. So, this is why names hold weight. Taken together, the picture and the words seem to leave no doubt that Osiris was here conceived and represented as a personification of the corn which springs from the fields after they have been fertilized by the inundation. This, according to the inscription, was the kernel of the mysteries. And we know that they called military men colonels. Okay. Um, the innermost secret revealed to the initiated. So, in the rites of Demeter at Eleusis, a reaped ear of corn was exhibited to the worshippers as the central mystery of their religion. We can now fully understand why, at the great festival of sowing in the month of Koyak, the priests used to bury effigies of Osiris made of earth and corn. When these effigies were taken up again at the end of a year or of a shorter interval, the corn would be found to have sprouted from the body of Osiris, and this sprouting of the grain would be hailed as an omen, or rather as the cause of the growth of the corpse. I said corpse. The growth of the crops. Funny how corpse and crops resemble. The corn god produced the corn himself. He gave his own body to feed the people. He died that they might have life. And from the death and resurrection of their great God, the Egyptians drew not only their support and sustenance in this life, but also their hope of a life eternal beyond the grave. This hope is indicated in the clearest manner by the very remarkable effigies of Osiris, which have come to light in Egyptian cemeteries. Thus, in the Valley of the Kings at Thebes, there was found the tomb of a royal fan bearer who lived about 1500 BC. Among the rich contents of the tomb, there was a bier on which rested a mattress of reeds covered with 3 layers of linen. On the upper side of the linen was painted a life-size figure of Osiris, and the interior of the figure, which was waterproof, contained a mixture of vegetable mold, barley, and a sticky fluid. The barley had sprouted and sent out shoots 2 or 3 inches long. Again, in the cemetery at Sinopolis were numerous burials of Osiris figures. These were made of grain wrapped up in cloth and roughly shaped like an Osiris and placed inside a bricked up recess at the side of the tomb, sometimes in small pottery coffins, sometimes in wooden coffins in the form of a hawk mummy, sometimes without any coffins at all. These corn stuffed figures were bandaged like mummies with patches of gilding, uh, patches of gilding here and there, as if in imitation of the golden mold in which the similar figures of Osiris were cast at the festival of sowing. Again, effigies of Osiris with faces of green wax and their interior full of grain were found buried near the necropolis of Thebes. Finally, we are told by Professor Urban that between the legs of mummies there sometimes lies a figure of Osiris made of slime. Ill. It is filled with grains of corn, the sprouting of which is intended to signify the resurrection of the god. Between their legs? Why? We cannot doubt that just as the burial of corn stuffed images of Osiris in the earth at the festival of sowing was designed to quicken the seed. Oh, okay, I get it. So the burial of similar images in the grave was meant to quicken the dead, in other words, to ensure their spiritual immortality. Okay, so remember, keep in mind the West being the land of the dead, like as in the Lion King, they had the elephant graveyard, okay, the dark side. In what is that? Luke, I am your father. Um, so there's one group called the Apache of the Southwest, who, or called the Querechos. They drank cow blood out of a cow's gut. Okay, they made skin teepees and were considered to be the tallest people in the world at one time. After they were not able to eat the When the Europeans came in, they stopped them from being able to, or they pretty much made the bison go extinct or something like that. So they started shrinking in size. So the the gods of Ammon and Moab, as this stated. Let me just take it back right quick. Take it back right quick. I should have underlined this. Either way, it said something about the ceremonies that the Cherokee did in honor of Osiris and Isis was compared to that of the rituals done by the Moabites. So let's talk about who the Moabites are. I need another cup of coffee. Okay. All right now. And I'm hungry. Okay, so quick overview. The Moabites are a Semitic people mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, who were related to the Israelites and lived east of the Dead Sea. The Bible says the Moabites were descended from Moab, the son of Lot, and his oldest daughter, after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The Moabites' language was similar to Hebrew, and they likely could communicate with the Israelites without a translator. Again, the um, descended from Moab, the son of Lot, and his oldest daughter. Incest. Okay, so the Moabites and Israelites had a complicated relationship marked by conflict but also intermarriage. In the 11th century, King Saul of Israel fought against the Moabites, but later the Moabites gave asylum to David's family. The Bible also says that God promised land to the Moabites, but later cursed them. Something to think about. The Moabites worshiped the god Shamash, and their rulers had priestly authority. They offered bulls and rams as sacrifices, and some altars had artwork influenced by other civilizations. Here are some of the other things the Bible says about the Moabites. The Moabites and Ammonites hired Balaam to curse Israel on its way to the promised land. Deuteronomy 2 through 9 prohibits Israelites from marrying Moabites. Third, Ruth, a Moabite woman, marries a Judean immigrant and later chooses to go with her mother in law to Judah. All right, so we just read about Solomon and his many wives. So again, Shamash or Shamash, this is in other mythologies the son of Zu. King Solomon of Israel built a sanctuary to him east of Jerusalem. The shrine was later demolished by King Josiah. He also transferred the altar of God from Babylon and worked with demon builders called the Igigi or the Watchers. We know that the Watchers were the giants of old. As I stated, the Apache Indians were the tallest people in the world. Um, Apache of the Southwest, Lipan, Lipan, La Pan Apache, New Mexico, and Texas, the Plains Apache or Kiowa Apache of Oklahoma, and Querétaro Apache of Texas. We all know what went on in Texas, the Texas Chainsaw Massacres and whatnot. Okay, now, Lord, how much? Okay, so the god of money, Mammon. Um, Now this is the Shumash people. We know what goes on in California, Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles. Okay, so the Shumash people are a Native American people of the central and southern coastal regions of California and portions of what is now Kern. Now we just got through talking about the children of the corn. San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Los Angeles counties, extending from Morro Bay in the north to Malibu in the south. What did Kendrick call Drake Malibu's most wanted? To Mount Pinos in the east. Their territory includes three of the Channel Islands: Santa Cruz, Santa Rosa, and San Miguel. The smaller island of Anacapa was likely inhabited seasonally due to the lack of a consistent water source, as we stated about the rising and the falling of the waters and the being dried out at certain times. Okay, stay with me now. Modern place names with Chumash origins include Malibu, Nipomo, Lompoc, Ojai, Pismo Beach, Point Mugu, Port Hueneme, I know I'm probably messing these names up, Piru, and let me just pause right there. Here's my notes. Okay, Piru Bloods or the Mob. What is this? Notable rappers of the Piru gang are the 10 cell phones from Elm Street Pyrus. Who's from Elm Street? The Sleep Demon, Freddy Krueger. Okay, then we have 26 AR 59 Prime Time Grim Bloods, Tupac, Mob Pyrus, 6 9 formerly Your Mama, and Treetop Pyrus. Their colors being burgundy, maroon, and olive green, which sounds like Christmas colors. And then we also have Chris Brown, Bumpton, and Fruittown. Okay, now just hold on to that. So Lake Castaic, Saticoy, Simi Valley, and Somis. Archaeological research demonstrates that the Chumash people have deep roots in the Santa Barbara Channel area and lived along the Southern California coast for millennia. Um, don't know if anyone has seen the TV show called The Santa Clarita Diet. It is about a woman who turned into a zombie, and her husband, he wasn't a zombie, but he was helping her take people out and storing them in a storage locker, like the U-Haul storage places. And she had them in a big deep freezer to eat for later. So, the history prior to European contact, pre 1542. Indigenous peoples have lived along the California coast for at least 11,000 years. Sites of the Milling Stone Horizon date from 7,000 to 4,500 BC and show evidence of a subsistence system focused on the processing of seeds with methods and manos. Again, keep in mind the Osiris ritual. Now, a milling stone, just have to put that out there for the wicked, says that you should have never been born, or that you should just take a millstone, wrap it around your neck, and jump into the sea if you come against the little ones of God. Okay. Just a side note. So during that time, people used bipointed bone objects and lime to catch fish and began making beads from shells of the marine olive snail, Calianix biblicata. The name Shamash means bead maker or seashell people, being that they originated near the Santa Barbara coast. The Chumash tribes near the coast benefited most with the close juxtaposition of a variety of marine and terrestrial habitats, intensive upwelling in coastal waters, again with the rising and falling, and intentional burning of the landscape made the Santa Barbara Channel region one of the most resource abundant places on the planet. Hmm. While droughts were not uncommon in the centuries of the first millennium AD, a population explosion occurred with the coming of the medieval warm period. Marine productivity soared between 950 and 1300 as natural upwelling intensified off the coast. Before the mission period, the Chumash lived in over 150 independent villages speaking variations of the same language. Again, like the Tower of Babel before the Most High confused them. Much of their culture consisted of basketry, bead manufacturing, and trading, cuisine of local abalone and clam, herbalism, which consisted of using local herbs to produce teas and medical relief, rock art, and the scorpion tree. Now, basket making. As we talk about Babylon, there is a story that says a woman took a basket and flew down to Shinar or flew up, wherever she got flew out to. Okay, just hold that thought. The scorpion tree was significant to the Shumash as shown in its arboglyph, a carving depicting a six-legged creature with a headdress, including a crown and two spears. Now, remind you that the giants had six fingers, six toes. The shamans participated in the carving, which was used in observations of the stars and in part of the Chumash calendar. The Chumash resided between the Santa Ynez Mountains and the California coast, where a bounty of resources could not be found. The tribe lived in an area of three environments: the interior, the coast, and the northern Channel Islands. The interior is composed of the land outside the coast and spanning the wide plains, rivers, and mountains. The coast covers the cliffs, land close to the ocean, and the areas of the ocean from which the Chumash harvested. The northern Channel Islands lie off the coast of the Chumash territory. All of the California coastal interior has a Mediterranean climate due to the incoming ocean winds. The mild temperatures, save for winter, made gathering easy. During the cold months, the Chumash harvested what they could and supplemented their diets with stored foods. What villagers gathered and traded during the seasons changed depending on where they resided. With coasts populated by masses of species of fish and land densely covered by trees and animals, the Chumash had a diverse array of food. Abundant resources and a winter rarely harsh enough to cause concern meant the tribe lived a sedentary lifestyle in addition to a subsistence existence. Villages in the three aforementioned areas contained remains of sea mammals, indicating that trade networks existed for moving materials throughout the Chumash territory. The Chumash were connected to extensive trade networks reaching into modern day Arizona, from which pottery and textiles were traded in exchange for shell beads. The emergence of this trade network with the Chumash territory was facilitated by the existence of three distinct Chumash ecological groups, including the island, coastal, and mainland Chumash. Access to distant resources for these different groups made inter-Chumash trade a large part of life. Villages along the mainland coast emerged as intermediaries between groups. The closer a village was to the ocean, the greater its reliance on maritime resources. Due to advanced canoe designs, coastal and island people could procure fish and aquatic mammals from farther out. Sh- uh, Shellfish were a good source of nutrition, relatively easy to find and abundant. Many of the favored varieties grew in tidal zones. Shellfish grew in abundance during winter to early spring. Their proximity to shore made collection easier. We know what scripture says about eating the shellfish. Some of the consumed species included mussels, abalone, and a wide array of clams. Haliotis replicans, red abalone, was harvested along the central California coast in the pre-contact area. The Chumash and other California Indians also used red abalone shells to make a variety of fish hooks, beads, ornaments, and other artifacts. Water. What? What? No, get some water. Excuse me. Um, Ocean animals such as otters and seals were thought to be primary meal of coastal tribes people, but recent evidence shows the aforementioned trade networks exchanged oceanic animals for terrestrial foods from the interior. Any village could acquire fish, but the coastal and island communities specialized in catching not just smaller fish, but also the massive catches such as swordfish. This feat, difficult even for today's technology, was made possible by the Tomo plank canoe. Its design allowed for the capture of deep water fish and it facilitated trade routes between villages. Some researchers believe that the Chumash may have been visited by Polynesians between AD 400 and 800, nearly 1,000 years before Christopher Columbus reached the Americas. The Chumash advanced stone plank canoe design, used throughout the Polynesian islands but unknown in North America, except by those tribes, is cited as the chief evidence for contact. Comparative linguistics may provide evidence as the Chumash word for stone plank canoe, tomo, tomoloo, may have been derived from kumula owl. Sounds like the mala. Okay. The Polynesian word for the redwood logs used in that construction. However, the language comparison is generally considered tentative. Furthermore, the development of the Chumash plank canoe is fairly well represented in the archaeological record and spans several centuries. The concept is rejected by most archaeologists who work with the Chumash culture, and there is no evidence of a genetic legacy. Before contact with Europeans, coastal Chumash relied less on terrestrial resources than they did on maritime, vice versa for interior Chumash. Regardless, they consumed similar land resources. Like many other tribes, deer were the most important land mammal that the Chumash pursued. Deer were consumed in varying amounts across all regions, which cannot be said for other terrestrial animals. Interior Chumash placed greater value on the deer to the extent that they had unique hunting practices for them. They dressed as deer and grazed alongside the animals until the hunters were in range to use their arrows. This goes into the whole skinwalkers. Okay. So even Chumash close to the ocean pursued deer, though in understandably fewer numbers, and what more meat the villages needed, they acquired from smaller animals such as rabbits and birds. Plant foods compose the rest of Chumash diet, especially acorns, which were the staple food despite the work needed to remove their inherent toxins. They could be ground into a paste that was easy to eat and store for years. Coast live oak provided the best acorns. Their mush would be served usually unseasoned with meat and or fish. Find a lot of acorns in Indiana, Memphis, Tennessee. Okay. So the Spanish contact and the mission period, 1542 through 1834. The Spaniard Juan Cabrillo was the first European to make contact with the coastal Alta California tribes in the year 1542. Ooh, excuse me. Cabrillo died and was buried on San Miguel Island, but his men brought back a diary that contained the names and population counts for many Chumash villages, such as Miku. Spain claimed what is now California from that time forward, but did not return to settle until 1769, when the first Spanish soldiers and missionaries arrived with the double purpose of Christianizing the Native Americans and facilitating Spanish colonization. By the end of 1770, missions and military presidios had been founded at San Diego to the south of Chumash lands and Monterey to their north. With the arrival of the Europeans came a series of unprecedented blows to the Chumash and their traditional lifeways. Anthropologists, historians, and other scholars have long been interested in documenting the collision of cultures that accompanied the European exploration and colonization of the Americas. Spain settled on the territory of the Chumash in 1770. They founded colonies, bringing in missionaries to begin evangelizing Native Americans in the region by forcing Chumash villages into numerous missions springing up along the coast. The Chumash people moved from their villages to the Franciscan missions between 1772 and 1817. Mission San Luis Obispo, established in 1772, was the first mission in Chumash speaking lands, as well as the northernmost of the five missions ever constructed in those lands. Next established in 1782 was Mission San Buenaventura on the Pacific coast near the mouth of the Santa Clara River. Mission Santa Barbara, also on the coast and facing out to the Channel Islands, was established in 1786. Mission La Purisma Conception was founded along the inland route from Santa Barbara north to the San Luis Obispo in 1789. The final Franciscan mission to be constructed in native Chumash territory was Santa Ynez, founded in 1804 on the Santa Ynez River with a seed population of Chumash people from missions La Purisma and Santa Barbara. To the southeast, Mission San Fernando, founded in 1798 in the land of Takic Shoshonian speakers, also took in large numbers of Chumash speakers from the middle Santa Clara River Valley. While most of the Chumash people joined one mission or another between 1772 and 1806, a significant portion of the native inhabitants of the Channel Islands did not move to the mainland missions until 1816. Radiocarbon dating of artifacts on the northernmost of the Channel Islands, San Clemente Island, suggests that the Chumash people lived without significant contact from Spanish settlers and missionaries until the 1870s or 1810. This island shows a clear lack of Spanish influence on its archaeology up until this point. Because of its remoteness, it was perhaps the last Chumash area to be colonized. Mexican era of 1834 to 1848. Mexico seized control of the missions in 1834. Tribespeople either fled into the interior, attempting farming for themselves, and were driven off the land, or were enslaved by the new administrators. Many found highly exploitative work on large Mexican ranches. After 1849, most Chumash land was lost due to theft by Americans and a declining population due to the effects of violence and disease. The remaining Chumash people to lose their cohesive identity. In 1855, a small piece of land, 120 acres, was set aside for just over 100 remaining Chumash Indians near Santa Ynez Mission. This land ultimately became the only Chumash reservation, although Chumash individuals and families also continued to live throughout their former territory in Southern California. Today, the Santa Ynez Band lives at and near Santa Ynez. The Chumash population was between roughly 10,000 and 18,000 in the late 18th century. In 1990, 213 Indians lived on the Santa Ynez Reservation. American era, 1848 to the present. The Chumash Reservation, established in 1901, which is the Memphis area code, okay, encompasses 127 acres. No native Chumash speak their own language since Mary Yee. The last Barbaringo speaker died in 1965. Today, the Chumash are estimated to have a population of 5,000 members. Many current members can trace their ancestors to the five islands of Channel Islands National Park. Beginning in the 1970s, Neo-Shamash arose, tracing their lineage nearly completely from the descendants of Spanish colonists to the domain of the initial Chumash people. They promote traditions of the Chumash and are recognized locally. Their cultural assumption has been criticized by some, but is supported by others. The first modern Tomol was built and launched in 1976 as a result of a joint venture between Kwabaji Chumash of the Coastal Band of the Chumash Nation and the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. Its name is Zelek, the Chumash word for falcon. The Brotherhood of the Tamil was revived, and her crew paddled and circumnavigated around the Santa Barbara Channel Islands on a 10-day journey, stopping on three of the islands. The second Tamil, the Eliawoon or swordfish, was launched in 1997. On September 9, 2001, the first crossing in the Chumash Tamil from the mainland to Channel Islands was sponsored by the Chumash Maritime Association and the Barbados Chumash Council. Several Chumash bands and descendants gathered on the island of Lamu, the Chumash name for Santa Cruz Island, to witness the El Yawun being paddled from the mainland to Santa Cruz Island. The journey was documented in the short film Return to Lamu, produced by the Ocean Channel for the Chumash Maritime Association, Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, and the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum. The channel crossings have become a yearly event hosted by the Barbados Chumash Council. The Santa Ynez Band of Chumash is a federally recognized Chumash tribe. They have the Santa Ynez Reservation located in Santa Barbara County near Santa Ynez. Chumash people are also enrolled in the Cheyenne Indian tribe of California. In addition to the Santa Ynez Band, the Coastal Band of the Chumash Nation and the Barbados Ventureño Band of Mission Indians are attempting to gain federal recognition. Other Chumash tribal groups include the Northern Chumash Tribal Council, descendants from the San Luis Obispo area, and the Barbados Chumash Council, descendants from the greater Santa Barbara area. The publication of the first Chumash dictionary took place in April 2008, 600 pages long and containing 4,000 entries. The Samala English Dictionary includes more than 2,000 illustrations. Now we have Kamala Harris, okay, Sumala, Kamala, okay, and she claims to have Indian descent, okay. So we have this confusion of faith. We have an intermixing, which the Bible told the Israelites not to do. Now we have people who want to take over our land. Well, they've already taken it. They want to take not only the land, but the inheritance, both physical and spiritual, in a sense. Okay. So the documentary film Six Generations, A Chumash Family History features Mary B., the last speaker of the Barbino Chumash language. Produce Initiative. In December 2010, the Food Bank of Santa Barbara County was the recipient of a $10,000 grant from the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash Indians Foundation to support expansion of the Produce Initiative. Now, I will later on another video go into how the Masons and Eastern Stars, um, how they play a part in the food drives and food banks and whatnot. Okay, so the Produce Initiative puts an emphasis on supplying fruits and vegetables to 264 local nonprofits and food programs. The food bank distributes produce free of charge to member agencies to encourage healthy eating. Expanding produce accessibility to children is important to the food bank and the newly operating Kids Farmers Market program. An extension of the Produce Initiative achieves that goal. The program trains volunteers to teach kids in after school programs, nutrition, education, and hands on cooking instruction. This program currently operates at 12 sites countrywide, including in the Santa Ynez Valley. Really, get it together. Now, after the children cook and eat a healthy meal, they get to take home a bag full of fresh produce where they can help feed and cook for the whole family. Obesity in children is a major health problem prevalent among Native Americans, so they say. Okay, so now all of this goes back into the um, what is it, the Moabite people. Okay, so keep in mind the names of these peoples and their location. So, with that being said, we know we have Hollywood is based in Los Angeles County. Okay, now let us continue with the cosmology. So, Chumash worldview is centered on the belief that considers all things to be, in varying measure, alive, intelligent, dangerous, and sacred. According to Thomas Blackburn in December's Child, who's the December child? That would be Jesus, right? So, a book of Chumash oral narratives published in 1980. The Chumash do not have a creation story like Tangua or the Ak, what is it? Akjakaman, the Quech Naj, I'm messing it up. The Quech Naj, the Quech Nachukam, and other Takic speaking peoples. Rather, as summarized by Susan Suntree, they assume that the universe with its three, or in some versions, five layers has always been here. Human beings occupy the middle region, which rests upon two giant snakes. Chronological time is important, though the past is divided into two sections. The universal flood that caused the first people to become the natural world, and thereafter the creation of human beings, the arrival of the Europeans, and the devastating consequences that followed. The middle region, sometimes referred to as Antap, where humans and spirits of where humans and spirits of this world live and where shamans could travel and vision quests, is interconnected with the lower world, or the Oyan Asha. Through the springs and marsh areas, is connected to the upper world through the mountains. Now, this goes into astral world, as in, who was that? I forget his name. Scott, some Scott, Travis Scott. Yeah, where they have the concert, and then the concert uh, ended in trampling or smashing of people. Okay, chumash, shamash. Okay, so and then we have marine spirits, so they deal in water spirits, and the jinn, so like the drink gin and juice, and things like Beetlejuice, which is like the Egyptian conjuring up spirits from the underworld. Okay, stay with me. Now, in the lower world live snakes, frogs, salamanders. The world trembles or has earthquakes when the snakes which support the world writhe or slither. So, water creatures are also in contact with the powers of the lower world and were often depicted in rock art, perhaps to bring more water to the Shumash or to appease underworld spirits at times of hunger or disease. Etiashap is the home of the first people. Alapay is the upper world in Chumash cosmology where the sky people live, who play an important role in the health of the people. Principal figures of the sky world include the sun, the moon, lizard, sky coyote, and eagle. The sun is the source of life and is also a source of disease and death. The sky coyote, also known as the great coyote of the sky or Schnillimum, is considered to be a protector and, according to Insigno Chumash lore, looks out for the welfare of all in the world below him. During the creation of mankind, the sky coyote was present among the other important cosmological figures. According to John M. Anderson in his work, Chumash Demonology, the eagle, also known as Slow or Slow, is what it looks like, SLO apostrophe W, represents the ruler of Polaris, which is the North Star. The eagle also is the force that maintains momentum and order among the stars so that they do not fall down on and destroy Earth. What does the book of Revelation tell you? That the sun will go dark, the moon will fall out of with the moon will turn to blood, and the stars will fall out of the sky. Okay, so cosmology and astronomy. The Chumash cosmology is also centered around astronomy. Rock art and arborglyphs that have been found within Chumash sites are thought to have depicted Polaris, the North Star, and Ursa Major, the Big Dipper. Specialists Rex St. Ong, John R. Johnson, and Joseph R. Talagon argues in their article Archaeoastronomical Implications of a Northern Chumash Arborglyph that these two astrological entities were paramount to the Chumash belief system as well as their perception of time. It is believed that the Chumash used these constellations to determine what time of the year it was, depending on the position of Ursa Major and Polaris. Chumash bands. One Chumash band, the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash Mission Indians of the Santa Ynez Reservation, is a federally recognized tribe, and other Chumash people are enrolled in the federally recognized Tejan Indian tribe. There are 14 bands of Chumash Indians. Barbareño Chumash, affiliated with the Tanayan Missions and the Kashwa Reservation. Kashwa, like cash, as in the god of Mammon. The coastal band of the Chumash Nation, their historical territory north of Los Angeles, includes parts of the coastal counties of Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Kern, and Ventura. The coastal band of the Chumash Nation applied for recognition in 1981. uh, Kuyama Kumash from the Kuyama Valley, Island Kumash from the Channel Islands, Pagas Muas Chumash from the southwesternmost region of the ancestral Chumash land. Their historical lands are now part of Vandenberg Space Force Base. Los Angeles Chumash formed when members of the historic Malibu, Tejon, and Ventura bands were relocated in the 19th century. Malibu Chumash from the coast of Malibu, descendants of this band can now be found among the Ventura, Coastal, Tejon, and San Fernando Valley bands. Monterey Chumash from the Monterey Peninsula, Samala or Santa Ynez Chumash. The Santa Ynez Chumash people in 2012 went to federal court to regain more land. The Bureau of Indian Affairs approved the request. The land was to go toward tribal housing and a Chumash museum and cultural center. Protesters and anti-tribal groups have spent approximately $2 million to disrupt or stop the land acquisition. San Fernando Valley Chumash, once laborers at the Mission San Fernando Rey de España, they intermarried other tribes who also worked at the mission. Yak Tichu Yak, Tilhani, Northern Chumash, homelands from coastal Avila Beach to Morro Bay. They are the northwesternmost Chumash people located in San Luis Obispo County. Takuya Chumash, most of this band of Chumash people were probably Tagus Lewis. This band was established as an anti-colonial group who took residence in the Takuya Canyon along with the Tejon Chumash. The Tejon Chumash, part of the Kern County Chumash Council. Tejon is the Spanish word for badger, and its name was given to the Tejon Rancheria. Venture Chumash lives in the traditional Chumash domain of the Owl Clan. The Owl Clan. The Owl Clan. I need to read about the population. Mm, Okay, I'll read it. So, estimates for the pre contact populations of most native groups in California have varied substantially. The anthropologist Alfred L. Kroeber thought the 1770 population of the Chumash might have been about 10,000. Alan K. Brown concluded that the population was about 15,000. Sherborne F. Cook at various times estimated the Aboriginal Chumash as 8,000, 13,650, 20,400, or 18,500. Some scholars have suggested the Chumash population may have declined substantially during the Proto-Historic period, 1542 to 1769, when intermittent contacts with the crews of Spanish ships, including those of Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo's expedition, who wintered in the Santa Barbara Channel in AD 1542 to 43, brought disease and death. The Chumash appears to have been thriving in the late 18th century when Spaniards first began actively colonizing the California coast. Whether the deaths began earlier with the contact with ships' crews or later with the construction of several Spanish missions at Ventura, Santa Barbara, Lompoc, Santa Ynez, and San Luis Obispo, the Chumash were eventually devastated by the California genocide carried out when the United States took over the territory. By 1900, their numbers had declined to just 200, while current estimates of Chumash people today range from 2,000 to 5,000. The demographics of traditional Chumash society are quite complex. One aspect of interest is the Aki or AQI gender of the Chumash. Aki was a third Chumash gender defined by biological males that performed work and wore clothing traditionally of women. Performed work and wore clothing traditionally of women. Thou shalt not wear that pertaining to a woman. Okay? The Aki gender appears to be closely tied to non procreative sexual activity, such as homosexuality. Archaeological investigation of mortuary practices has provided evidence for this. Hmm. Whew. Okay, so we know that they were hunter gatherers, used boats as the seafaring people or wayfaring people, basketry, um, seashells by the seashore. They also, the mainland tribe in turn export seeds, acorns, bows, and arrows, fur, skin, roots, and baskets to the islands. So with the trader trading trade tours, okay, then we have um, they had, it has been suggested that exclusive control over stone quarries used to manufacture the drills needed in bead production could have played a role in the development of social complexity in Chumash society. As we know, the stone quarries goes back to the stone masons. Okay, and we'll talk about that later. So you can check out older videos that I've made. Um, I'll go into the details on that later. Now, uh, so we also have the foods, which included marine species such as black abalone, the Pacific little neck clam, red abalone, the bent nosed clam, Australurida oysters, angular unicorn snails, and the butternut clam. Acorns, an important plant food, were ground up and cooked into a soup. They also made flour from the dried fruits of the laurel sumac. Highly prized seafoods such as swordfish were caught through the use of plank canoes and were likely shared by chiefs during communal feasts. Feasts are a ritual activity of communal consumption of large quantities of food and drinks, along with dances, music, and singing. They played a large role in political and social relations for the Chumash people. The feast would be prepared over many days by women and would coincide with major events such as childbirth, marriages, and chiefs' birthdays. There are accounts of feasts being held for European expeditions passing through Chumash territories, and there we have with the blending of cultures. During the time of Spanish colonization, some diets of the Chumash people living on mission sites shifted to include European plants and animals. This goes back into the story of Amalek. Remember what Amalek did and how we destroyed them and their animals. Evidence has been found that more sheep and cattle were consumed during the 19th century. Traditional hunting and fishing practices were still maintained alongside the addition of European livestock. Now, what does European livestock include? There is evidence to suggest that a seafaring fishing economy in the Channel Islands has been around for at least 12,000 years. This can be seen through various types of fishing projectile points as well as animal remains such as seal, shellfish, and fish, all found at sites across the islands by archaeologists and researchers. Coastal people of California have been maintaining their food practices in various ways for a very long time. Herbs were used in traditional Chumash medicine, include thick-leaved yerba santa, used to keep airways open for proper breathing. Laurel sumac, the root bark of which was used to make a herbal tea for treating dysentery, and black sage. The leaves and stems were made into a strong sun tea. This was rubbed on the painful area or used to soak one's feet. The plant contains diterpenoids such as ethiopenine and ursolic acid, which are known pain relievers. Now, remember the curses of Egypt, the botches in the knees, arthritis, boils, and all that good stuff. So the Chumash formally practiced an initiation rite involving the use of a sacred datura, mamoy in their language. When a boy was 8 years old, his mother would give him a preparation of it to drink. This was supposed to be a spiritual challenge to help him develop the spiritual well being required to become a man. Not all of the boys survived the poison. Why are we giving 8-year-old boys poison? Okay. Now, all right, that's enough of that for this evening. I'll go into the owl crew of the Illuminati, the the high places of Los Angeles, and the historicity of it, and the people who built on those high places. This is in regards to the warnings to the seven churches of Asia. Yes, yes, confirmation aided. Yes. So thank you guys again for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to warn your people of the coming doom of America and said nations surrounding. This is a worldwide warning. Love you all that love me. Peace and blessings. I'm out.